started. In the name of Allah, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. My name is Zainab Ansari, and I'm accompanied by
Matt Bilal King.
And we are interviewing Sister Wanda Rashid and Brother Kenneth Rashid on January 12, 2014 at the West End Islamic Center. And briefly for the record, Sister Wanda, could you please state your date and place of birth?
My date of birth is August 26, 1952, and my place of birth is Durham, North Carolina.
And for the record, Brother Kenneth, could you please state your date of birth and place of birth?
December 14th, 1956, New Orleans, Louisiana.
Okay, thank you so much. And Sister Wanda, what is your occupation?
Right now, I'm a substitute teacher for the Atlanta Public Schools.
Okay, and Brother Kenneth?
I teach in the community college system of Georgia.
All right, now the purpose of our interview is to really capture your experiences, your memories or recollections of your journeys to Islam, as well as life amongst the Atlanta's African-American Muslim community. As I stated, the interview is voluntary, so if any questions make you feel uncomfortable, just cue us and we'll just move on to the next topic, inshallah. So, I'm going to begin. I'd like to know more about your family background. Sister Wanda, I know that you were born in Durham. Brother Kenneth, you were born in New Orleans. I was also born in New Orleans. So I'd like to hear more about your respective families, how you met, your children. Inshallah, just get us
Would
started.
you prefer to go back to grandparents? I noticed something.
Oh, absolutely, as far back as you wish to go.
Well, I can say that I knew my great-grandfather. He was born in 1865, right after the Civil War ended. He was born in Vance County, North Carolina. He was the only one I did not know my great-grandmother. My grandmother was Helen Amos. She was born in Vance County, North Carolina. I did not know my grandfather. He died when my mother was young, but I know he was also born in North Carolina. My mother, Vera Graham, was born in Durham, North Carolina. Now, my father's side, I did not know my grandfather, and we're not really sure of his ethnicity. We're thinking that he was from Tennessee. Now, my grandmother, she was born in Sumter County, South Carolina, and my father was born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
So, now, is there any part of the family that's in Georgia?
Yes, me. Other than me, no one else is in Georgia.
Okay.
I did, having been born in North Carolina, that was just my place of birth. We first moved to New Haven, then we moved to New Haven, Connecticut, then we moved to Staten Island, New York, where I began school, and then we moved back to New Haven. So even though, because a lot of people say, well, you're in North Carolina, and then born in Durham, and then they say, well, do you know so-and-so, so-and-so? I said I was born there, but I'm not familiar with that part of it, so I cannot give you a good answer about that. We have visited a lot, so I do know some of the area, but not part where you can say that you grew up there and you know the area really well. So I say I was born there, but Kenneth teases me a lot. He said, you're not born from North Carolina, you're just from Connecticut. I said, well, I'll claim that then.
And that was my next question. In doing interviews, I've seen that with many African-American families, there are sort of southern roots, but there's the experience of actually having lived and gone to school up north. For example, my mother-in-law has had that experience, my mom as well. Southern origins, but really life was up north.
Well, I can tell you what happened in my family, because my parents both spoke about it. They made a conscious decision to leave North Carolina because my father was attacked by a white man on his job, and he said that he did not want to raise any of his family in North Carolina because he did not want us to experience anything that he did. One of the things that, once I went away to college, I did go back and tell both of my parents that you kept us in a bubble. And I was very angry with them about it because I thought that you did not really allow us to know a lot of the things that happened to you and a lot of things that were going on, because even though we were in Connecticut, we were still in a bubble, so to speak. We stayed within a community of people. We did not experience any outward racism, but I'm sure it was there, whether subtly or not. My parents never spoke about it verbally with us, but they did visit. They went to the March on Washington in 1963, which is interesting. We knew they were going somewhere. My grandmother was there staying with us, and they came back, and well, where did you all go? We just went to Washington, D.C., and that was it, which I thought, like I said, in hindsight, when I told them, I said, you really did us an injustice. You should have really spoken to us and let us know what was really going on. Because it's really hard to get slapped in the face with it. And you're wondering out, what is this all about? You know, what is this all about? And then you get the stories from them, the reason why, you know, he took his family and moved or had family outside of the South is because of that. And then you get the stories from my grandmother was telling me some of the things that she experienced, and it's like, wow. I mean, but not so much that you know it happened, but it was just that you never shared that with us when I think you should have.
And Brother Kenneth, do you have a similar experience? Or
No.
you always lived in the South?
No, mine is totally different from hers. I was born in New Orleans, raised in New Orleans. I went to college in New Orleans. My first job professionally after I got my master's was in New Jersey, which was actually the first place where I was told you cannot rent because of your race. Now, I'm a baby of desegregation. I'm younger than the previous interviewers, but old enough to have lived through segregation. So I was raised Catholic. I made my first communion in the back of the church. We sat on a separate side. The church was in a white neighborhood, but we sat on a separate side from the white congregants in that facility. We lived in a unique community because it was the first black community of homeowners in New Orleans after World War II. And it was built on a swamp, which years later became problematic. You know, it was built on a swamp, and they built it for black World War II and Korea era veterans who were coming home who could get VA. And so we had this cross-section, real unique community. It's Terrence Blanchard, the musician, and Wendell Pierce, the guy who's the artist who's involved in several television shows. They all grew up in that neighborhood. They were younger than me, but they grew up in that neighborhood. And I know Wendell Pierce talks about Pontchartrain Park a lot in the Ninth Ward of New Orleans. But it was because it was this real unique place where you had this cross-section of people. We had poor and working class people in the same block with doctors who could buy 2 lots and build a home on. And in my neighborhood, we cross-section of all kind of people from, you know, postal workers, teachers, some medical professionals, the 1 or 2 little lawyers in the community. But it was all black. We had a ditch that separated our neighborhood from the white neighborhood. The bus didn't run back to our neighborhood. We grew up with they had a golf course in that neighborhood, but there were no rec department facilities. So my parents were the first people who fought to have the city spend money on building rec facilities. We played in segregated rec league. And when they integrated the rec leagues, we were the first teams to play the opposition white teams. And of course, we did win city championships and just about everything we did. But and then my parents were big on desegregating schools. So I was there when what's her name, Ruby Bridges, went to school. And Ruby Bridges was the first African American to integrate the public school system in New Orleans. My daddy brought me there. I was young, but I was right behind her in school. But I saw that. We experienced that. We desegregated the Catholic schools in New Orleans, my brother and I. And from what, 2nd grade on, I was one of a handful of black students in predominantly white schools, even though we lived in a predominantly black community, because my people were big on desegregation. To a large extent, I attribute those experiences to leading me to Islam, because by the time I was a teenager, I knew well how to hate. And I hated people who were cruel to me, and many of the teachers and coaches and adults in our life in the schools we went to were just cruel. You know, they were just vicious, and I learned how to be vicious back. I learned how to, to really hate. But no, I grew up a traditional Southern experience. I saw segregation. We couldn't go to our version of Six Flags. We couldn't go to certain restaurants until the mid-'60s, and then you had challenges even after. Some neighborhoods we couldn't go in, neighborhoods you knew you had to fight in when you went in them. If we left my neighborhood to go to the shopping center, which was in north of my neighborhood, in front of the white neighborhood, then if you caught, if you walked, you fought. And so most of the time we wouldn't walk. When we got married, one of the first times she went to New Orleans with me, because we met in D.C. and got married there, and we moved here, and then we went to visit New Orleans. She wondered why, as I was leaving my neighborhood, I stopped and picked up this guy who was just standing at the area that separated what was the historically black neighborhood from the historically white neighborhood. And he was just standing there. I pulled over, and she was asking me why. Because as a ritual in our neighborhood, if you were trying to get to the shopping center, you did not walk. And the buses, when we first moved back there, wouldn't go into the black neighborhood. You had to walk. So what we did was, in the neighborhood, we had our own system. You'd pick up people. You could stand at a certain spot, and if you were going to the highway, people in the community would pick up anybody. It didn't matter who they were. So even though this was, in the 80s, when she first went to New Orleans with me, and that white neighborhood was now all black, it was still a matter of custom for people who grew up there. You would stand at a certain spot if you wanted a ride to the shopping center, and people in the neighborhood would pick you up. But no, we grew up in southern races, and we grew up in southern segregation, right?
If I may, New Orleans stands out as one of those cities with a somewhat unique history in African American history. And you talked about the neighborhood being one of its was class heterogeneous. Was your family one of the families, sort of one of those well-known historic families of New Orleans?
No. I would say that they weren't. My family wasn't well known. My daddy was a junior high school coach, and as a result of that, a lot of people in the community knew my daddy, and my mama taught elementary school. So they had impact on people's lives, but we didn't come from one of those families, the Moriels, the Heidells, you name it. Usually the names got some French into it. My family wasn't from that experience. And my mother grew up in Edgard, Louisiana, in one of the parishes outside of New Orleans, outside of Kenner. If St. Charles, I think it was St. James Parish, where she grew up. And my daddy grew up in New Orleans, but his parents were from Berwick and Morgan City, Louisiana. And they moved to New Orleans, leaving the rural areas, coming to opportunity in the city. And then they built lives in New Orleans. My paternal I was fortunate. I always say as an African American, I was fortunate because I grew up with men in my life, all my life. And I never had that single parent experience. My paternal grandfather was in my life. My paternal grandmother, of course, was in my life. My daddy was in my life up until 6 years ago. Yeah, 6 years ago, he died. So I've always had men in my life, and I always had men who cared about raising their children. So I didn't have that kind of disjointed experience that some people have, and they struggle with trying to build a family for themselves. That was a big issue in my life, was family. I always had it. And we stayed in New Orleans when the flight from the Deep South went, and the people in New Orleans went west. Whereas people here in North Carolina, they went east. People in New Orleans went west. So when a lot of my daddy's peers in the 60s went to California, which is where, go to LA and you find a whole bunch of Louisiana people. When those folks went west, my daddy, I remember them fighting over that because my mama wanted to move. And because she was tired of limitations, because school teachers made less than garbage people. Black school teachers made less than garbage people. No health insurance, no benefits. It wasn't until the late 70s when they struck. I think it was the mid 70s. It wasn't late 70s, the mid 70s. I was like in middle school when the teachers union struck, and they got health benefits. So teachers didn't make that much money. I mean, they were, like I said, they were on the low end of the totem pole. They were between postal workers and garbage collectors, income-wise. So my mother wanted to move to California when those opportunities opened up. My daddy he was a mama's boy. His mama was in New Orleans, and he was not leaving New Orleans. His daddy was in New Orleans. He was not leaving New Orleans. After Katrina, he refused to leave New Orleans, even though my mama had Alzheimer's, and he was her primary caretaker. And he had respiratory issues, but he was dead set. He came here for a little while, and I tried to talk him into staying. He said, I'm going back, because he was a New Orleans boy. He was going to live and breathe in New Orleans, and he pretty much did up until the day and a half or so before he died. He left New Orleans, flew here, and died here, and then we ended up taking him back and buried him in New Orleans. But my experience was different from hers. It was comical when we met. She asked me, when she asked me where I was from, and I told her I was from New Orleans. She said, they got black people in New Orleans?
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm like, you from Connecticut? And you worrying about whether we got black people in New Orleans? I mean, give me a break. That's all we got in New Orleans.
Now, where were you? How did y'all meet?
D.C.
Oh,
We met in D.C.
The D.C. experience is rather interesting.
Yeah, mine was horrible. I went to law school in D.C.
I was at Howard University, and that was my first experience with Muslims.
Okay.
There were a set of twins, as a matter, you might know them. Walt Frazier was the brother.
Walt Frazier, point guard for the New York Knicks back in the 70s. Yeah.
That was their brother, and it was always amazing to me because everybody tried to talk to them, and I couldn't understand why. And then I realized because of her brother, they wanted to get. And then I met some Muslim males. I think they were with the Nation of Islam. I'm not sure. I always thought that they were very respectful. That always stayed with me. And even in New Haven, we would buy. The Muslim brothers would come. We would buy the fish. Wouldn't buy the newspaper though, because that newspaper was just a little bit more than I could handle at that time. And so when my dad decided he and I wanted to go on business together, and so I needed to get some business advice. Of course, we all do. And so I called Howard University. I know they had the Small Business Development Center, and they assigned me a person. And they told me his name was Rashid. I said, "Oh my God, this is a foreigner. This is a foreigner, and I won't even know what he's saying, and I don't know why they did this to me." You know, mindset, I guess, I don't know. So then, when I went in, he said, "I'm from New Orleans." I said, "And you're Rashid?" You know, the two didn't click, but that's how we met. He was my advisor,
Marketing consultant.
my marketing consultant, advisor. That's how we met. So. It was, like I said, it was an interesting story. But when he told me that, I didn't associate the name Rashid with Islam or with Muslim. I did not.
Just foreign.
Just a foreign. That's all I thought it was until he told me he was Muslim. And when he said he was Muslim, all those thoughts that I had when I was at Howard, when I was in New Haven, of the brothers being very respectful to sisters, that just came back in a flood. I said, wow, this man is Muslim. And I can remember how they always talked nice. They always was, these were the Muslims I knew now who was from the Nation of Islam, always very respectful, always concerned about your safety and your welfare. And so when he told me he was Muslim, those are the thoughts that came into my mind. So he might not be as bad as I think he is, even I don't know about that that name, but he's Muslim, so he must be okay. Only based very, very superficial, he must be okay because he says he's Muslim. And 8 months later?
Yeah,
8 months later,
married.
we were married.
Yeah, I was her small business advisor. And when I went to Howard Law School, I was in my third year. I was going in my third year. I think I was going in my third year then when we met. And I had an MBA before I went to law school, and I'd worked in government in New Orleans. So I started teaching in the business school at Howard. And while I was in law school, and then I got the job in the Small Business Development Center, which was a part of the business school. And we met. I was at a point in my life when I took my Shahada 6 months or so before I went to law school. So this was fall of '81. I took my Shahada roughly May, June '81. And it was around the same time I had decided to go to, well, a year before then I decided to go to law school. And so I go up to D.C., go to law school, get the job at Howard, we meet. And those first 2 years in law school, I was, in my mind, focused on school. And I had just become Muslim, and I really didn't have a good grasp on the concept of marriage in Islam. I mean, like I said, I grew up in a family of people who were big family people, grandparents, aunts. Everybody was married, everybody was together. We knew that, but the difference between, I think, my generation of people and the previous interviewees' generation of people, those people who were adults in the 60s and those of us who became adults in the 70s, was by the time they got to us, and I mean they, the outer society, they had figured out how to screw up a people, and was turning people on to rocks, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That's what, the 70s was pretty much that, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. The music went from messages to foolishness, disco, you name it. You can do a sociological study on all the things that impacted upon people's lives that used to have positive imagery or address the times shift away. Even the intoxicants got more bizarre in the 70s, from LSD to angel dust to you name it. And so when my generation of people came through, we knew what had happened in the 60s. We were victims of it as children. We admired, most of us admired that first generation of people who broke out on their own to try to establish black independent thought and culture. But most of us said that's a good experience, but this is a good time, and let's hang with this good time. So, just like many people during that era, that was my agenda. My agenda wasn't social political. As a teenager, as a college student, I went to Xavier, pledged Kappa, did all the stuff, and graduated, had a decent little job, and I went to it was a Black Independent Political Party convention they had in New Orleans in '79. I think it was '80, in the spring of '80. I just went. I don't know what even brought me there. Allah brought me there. And one of the speakers asked all the men in the audience to stand up. It was a banquet room full of folks. All the men stood up. We took pride in being the men in the room to stand up. We all stood up. Most of them were African American. And they said, all the men who, I think it was something like, all the men who have jobs continue to stand. And a group of people sat down. I was still standing. And they said, all the men who are married continue to stand. Big number sat down. And then they said, all the men who are continue to stand. If you're married, have a family, you're supporting that family. That number dwindled down to next to nothing. And what that identified for me in my personal life was like, wow, I'm defining myself as a man, but a man does more than satisfy his own individual desires, have a good time, make money. There's much more to it than that. And I had never the only time I had given thought to that was in like 9th and 10th grade, because my aunt used to always make fun of me because I used to say in 9th and 10th grade, I'm going to go to college, and sophomore year of college, I'm going to get married. I'm going to get married to my first high school sweetheart. I had a whole little plan. I don't know where that came from, but I had a plan. Well, that plan dissipated by the time I reached those the mid 70s. That plan was gone. But at that meeting in 1980, when this speaker was highlighting the significance of family obligations in people's lives, and I realized that wasn't on the path that I was on, and I needed to do something about it. So I then began to read more Malcolm, look back on those pivotal figures. Imam Jamil, because he had been a Baton Rouge guy, he was born, raised in Baton Rouge, and I was a New Orleans boy, but my parents went to Southern. We used to go up to Southern always for homecoming games. I remember as a 12, 13-year-old meeting Imam Jamil when he was H. Rap Brown at Southern homecoming games. So made myself more conscious of what people had done in that immediate past who were striking out for what I consider to be men. And I happened one night during that time period to be reading and listening to the radio, and an imam from the what was then the American Muslim Mission, which was one of the names that the Nation of Islam evolved into after they adopted the Sunni practices. The imam was on the radio, and like many African Americans, I was mad with them because they had integrated the black Nation of Islam. I just couldn't grasp that. It didn't make sense to me. So I called in the radio. I asked him, so why'd y'all do that? He said, he explained the history and what that evolved to. He invited me to come to the masjid. He said, you need to get a Quran and come by the masjid. So I bought a Quran at a bookstore, and I picked it up to read it as if it was going to be history as opposed to news. Because I view the Quran as like news. It's telling you what's going on right now from the prism of past and all, but it's telling you what's going on right now. And I'm thinking I'm going to pick up a history book that's going to go from day one to some other period in time. And so I went to the masjid to talk to him about that. And when I went in, he told me to come by on Friday for Juma. I didn't know what I was coming to. So I walked in, and when I walked in, what I saw, what I felt was men. Those men that this man was describing at that political meeting, that's what I felt. I said, these are men. These are men who are willing to pray, who, submitting their lives to something much bigger than themselves. And I said then to myself, when I walked in, I said, this is where I need to be. And during that era, we didn't do a whole lot of formal shahada. I talked to the brother afterwards. I said, I want to do this. He said, you want to be Muslim? He said, yeah. I said, well, you are. These are the principles. These are the tenets of the faith. These are the things we do. You come by to, come to the community as often as you can. At that time, we used to do outreach in the prisons and go play ball with the inmates. And every weekend, the families would get together and whatever the sporting event at the time was, volleyball, softball, baseball, we would all play and the families would unite. And so that experience of somebody challenging your manhood is what contributed to me becoming Muslim. And then along the same time, I was thinking, well, I want to do something big. I got to be important. And so, when you have no skills, you go to law school, despite what young people like to think, You have no tangible skills. You got no science skill, no math skill. You go to law school in this society. And I went to law school, and the most significant benefit out of it was us. When it was all said and done, I practiced law, I'm licensed in Louisiana and all, but what really came out of D.C. for me was us. That's all. Because we got married the day before I graduated. 2 weeks later, I was gone. And she knew I was leaving. I was coming here and leaving D.C., never to go back again. And I've been back about 2 or 3 times since then in 20 and 30. Yeah, 30 years now.
Atlanta and not New Orleans?
Because in New Orleans, growing up in New Orleans, like I said, people went west. But when I was in college, we all started, our sights started focusing on Atlanta. The AU Center was the big magnet. Even as an undergrad, just hanging out, we would come up here. We'd come to Atlanta. We'd come up to Atlanta for, the various Greek crap, Mr. V's, you name it, the clubs. Atlanta was always, and Atlanta always stuck in my mind as a good place to be. As a little boy, my daddy's closest friends, my daddy got out of high school, he played football at Clark. And 3 of them graduated together, they all came up to go to Clark. All 3 of them ended up going to Korea and fight in Korea. So when those 2 guys who he came to Atlanta with, when they finished their stint in the military, they came back to Atlanta. My old man went back to New Orleans. So those guys would come to New Orleans rather from here. And so we would hear what was going on in Atlanta, and then we would visit as a child. And I was always impressed with, these people were the same thing my daddy was, but they had 2 stories in a house, and they had a 3/4 of an acre of land, and we had a little small plot house. And I could never figure out what was going on in Atlanta, that these people were doing so well in Atlanta. So Atlanta always had been like a magnet to me. And I always said when I got out of school, I'm going to Atlanta. It was Atlanta, Dallas, Houston. And I found my way here after law school, because while I was in law school, I knew I was leaving D.C. D.C. was not a, D.C. was not, and it's not a place that I would live. It's just not a place that I would live. I mean, it's a beautiful place. You got tons of money. But I lived too hard in D.C. to stay. So when she met me, I had already decided that I was coming here before she met me.
Were you already, at that time, before you moved here, were you already aware of the Muslim presence here as well, Muslim community here?
No, not really. Not really. When we left, I left New Orleans, like I said, I took Shahada in June of 80. And yeah, June of 80, I think it was. June of 80, I went to Kansas for a pre-law program within three to 4 weeks of doing that. And then Ramadan was in the summer that year. And so I drove up on campus. I rode up with another person from New Orleans. We rode to this program together at KU. And as Allah would have it, we drove in. I knew we had to fast. I didn't know what Ramadan was. I just knew we were supposed to fast. And if they said you fast, I'm rolling. We'd roll in. When I rolled into the dormitory, there was a sign above the registration booth in the dormitory that said, all Muslims who are fasting in the month of Ramadan, sign up. I signed up.
This was at Howard?
This was at Kansas. I went to KU for a pre-law program before my first year in law school. And signed big as cuff right soon as I walked in. Signed up. As I'm signing up, a Muslim walks up. He said, "You Muslim?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, tonight's the first night of the fast, so come on down at Maghrib and we'll be breaking fast together." And my first experience, that's why one of the places I always say if I leave America to live permanently, it would be Indonesia. Because the primary group of people who were there were Indonesians. And they were very warm. I had never met Muslims before other than that small group of African Americans I met in New Orleans. I had never been around any communal experience. And then that group of people they took me in. It was warm, food was ready. The dorm gave us keys to the refrigerator, had halal food set aside for us. And we fast that summer, I fast that summer, and then left and went straight to D.C. So by the time I got to D.C., after 1 year, I knew I was not staying in D.C. after graduation. After I committed to completing this law thing, I was going to leave. And we came here. And she didn't mind, we married, let's roll. And we were, young, you just roll. And, what's going on? We didn't have a place. We came down here that April, got a place. Then after I graduated, I came first. And then 8 weeks or so later, she came down. And then we stayed. We actually stayed here 3 years. We stayed 3 years, and I had a lot of problems with allergies here. So then we moved. I took my license, got my license in Louisiana, and then we moved to New Orleans.
Okay.
Where are we?
We're going to record it.
Okay.
There's a story of somebody.
Yeah, somebody did that.
Yeah.
Somebody put the groundwork in to make that. Because this wasn't a struggle at all. When I went to Kansas, it was all in place. The suhoor meals were available in the refrigerator, and one brother had the key to the refrigerator. The iftar meals were available. All we had to do was come down.
To give you context, I teach at Morehouse now. We don't have that at Morehouse.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Yeah, not surprised.
It's only the degree to which we have it is only driven by what the MSA, especially the MSA president, is going to do. So we had a certain level, we were getting to it, and then of course,
the MSA leadership change.
So it's about how you get to pass that baton and try to maintain.
Yeah.
And there was a slide last semester as we shifted leadership.
You asked Kenneth about Atlanta. From Connecticut, I came to D.C. to go to Howard. I went home for a year and I came back to D.C. everything I heard about Atlanta was progressive. You know, you want to go to Atlanta if you really want to, you know, further your career and those types of things. My brother and my cousin, they visited Atlanta all the time, and they were saying, you really got to go. So that the seed is already planted there that
Right.
if given an opportunity to go to some place that somebody's always been talking positive about, that's what you would want to do. And so then when Kenneth said that when we graduate we're going to move into Atlanta, that was fine because I've already heard good things about it. There was always something positive being said about it, so going to Atlanta was great. I did want to say that when he moved here, and I was in D.C., that was the first year I tried to fast. He had given me a lot of books after we had gotten married, and growing up, get this, growing up a Southern Baptist, not a National Baptist, a Southern Baptist.
Okay. Southern Baptist is much more
It's
conservative.
White.
the white Baptist.
It's white.
No, this is Connecticut.
That's Bob Jones.
Yeah, this is Connecticut and
yeah.
New Haven, and you're growing up Southern Baptist, so I didn't know anything about anybody else but Southern Baptist.
Yeah.
So when he and I met and he gave me all these books to read, it made sense. You know how you read something that makes sense to you? And I guess for me, it was something I had been looking for all my life, because I told Kenneth this when I first met him. I think I was 12 or 13, and I said to my mother, how can God have a son? You ask those questions, and I never got an answer. I mean, how can she give me an answer? And so then when I met him, and I guess all those thoughts of all those positive Muslim brothers I had met or known, at Howard or in New Haven, and he's giving me these things to read, everything made sense. It just fell into place. But he moved, and I would get up on Saturday mornings and I would turn the radio on. Warthi Muhammad had a radio program on Saturday mornings that would come to one of the radio stations in D.C. I can't remember the station, but every Saturday I would make a point of getting up to listen to him. One particular Saturday he got up and he talked about Prophet Isa. He talked about his role, and when he said that, I knew I was Muslim that time, because it made sense to me. All the questions I had had in the past, even reading the materials that Kenneth gave me, when he said and told of the history of Prophet Isa, I knew that everything I had been looking for made sense. It was this. And I remember calling Kenneth. I told him, guess who I listened to today? And I told him about that. I said, I'm Muslim. Like he said, during that time there was no formal shahada per se, but I knew that that's how I wanted to live my life, because it made sense. It made sense. It was easy. I didn't have to go through anybody else to get what I perceived was any type of forgiveness, any type of mercy. It was all on me, how I was going to present myself to Allah. And I remember learning to make the salat. The ceremonial kind of thing. But I remember the first time for me when I went down in sajda, I started crying, because here you are realizing that you are not who you think you are. You are not the person who has this college degree and this education and all the rest of this stuff. You are a servant, and being a servant, you realize that you have to depend on something or somebody outside of yourself. And like I said, when that sajda, it's like, wow. And I need to go forward. I need to learn more. And so I think when we did get married in the Washington Masjid of Al-Islam, I remember we went to talk to the imam, and the first thing the imam said to Kenneth, I thought it was like, do you have a job? Are you going to support her? I'm like, wow, why would he ask him that? Not knowing. Why would he ask him, do you have a job and you're going to support him? At that time, he did not, because he was still in law school, which was okay with me. But then as we became a couple, as we became more into the Islam, it was not easy. It's never is easy, because we, as I guess you'd use it for reverts, you bring all that other stuff with you. And what you have to do is Allah's merciful, is to shake it off. And I guess the more you around Muslims who are of the same mindset, it's easy it is. I remember going into the Atlanta Masjid without Kenneth. I was greeted. I did not cover. I'm going to listen to what this man has to say. I don't know what all this is about. Nobody shunned me. They welcomed me. Come on in, sister. Have a seat. Do you need anything to eat? And I felt really, really good about that. I said, this is really a great, feeling. I don't know what these people want, but it's okay. I didn't feel threatened. I didn't feel like I was out of place, even though, like I said, I wasn't covered and everybody else was covered. I felt comfortable. And even when Kenneth moved, I would go to Juma without him. I would go over to masjid when I could. And it was just a great, comfortable feeling that you got from the Washington Masjid that Kenneth and I got married in. And the day we got married, that was another one. I know it was a mercy. D.C. can get hot, This is May 11th. It was right after Juma. They cleared up all the stuff at Juma. They set up seats because they knew, Kenneth and I were non-Muslim, so we're going to bring a lot
Our
of people.
families were non-Muslim.
Our families were non-Muslim, and a lot of our friends were. So they put up chairs for us. And as we sat there, they opened the doors. I don't know if you've been in Atlanta Masjid. They have a
Washington.
Washington Masjid, I'm sorry. There's a door on
There's
one
on
side.
4th Street.
Yeah, on 4th Street,
Door
yeah.
on one
yeah,
side, and
yeah.
there's another door on the other side. We're sitting there, and the breeze, it was so comfortable, and you could hear the birds singing outside. I said, this has got to be it. This has got to be it. Because where would you be in a city that's hot? You're in a masjid, the breeze is blowing, you're comfortable, and the birds are singing. And this man is asking, do you understand what this is? He's talking to both of us. And I remember asking Kenneth, because Kenneth was looking at me, and I'm thinking, why is he looking at me so intense? And I remember after I said, why were you looking at me like that? Why were you looking at me like that, Kenneth?
Oh, because it was serious. This wasn't no joke. This was a serious commitment. 30 years worth of commitment.
30 years worth of commitment.
We've been married 30 years in May.
Yeah.
Congratulations. This is a really beautiful story. So for Sister Wanda and Brother Kenneth, how did your families feel when you became Muslim?
Yeah, that was it. Yep.
Oh.
If you want to share that.
No,
No,
I
we
mean,
can,
I'm
we
fine.
can,
I
we
mean, the one thing about my daddy and I were close, was I always knew my old man was the kind of guy, he'd talk a big game, but he loved his children. So you take it as, you're going to take your children however they present yourselves. Now, my daddy was the kind of guy and I always was a person, because of my experience in school, my parents put a whole lot of faith and trust in this society. And in the latter years of their life, we talked about that a lot, and they used to tell them, say, y'all blew that. These people were vicious animals to all of us growing up, and you trusted them with your children. Since you should never do that. You can't trust your children with people who are vowed to be your enemy, people who treat you like dirt, people who treat you with disrespect. So because when we desegregated the Catholic school in the neighborhood right in front of our neighborhood, that experience was so negative. And then my high school experience, I went to a high school that ran from 7th to 12th grade. My junior high and high was the same. It was pretty much the same. It was just as foul, if not worse, except I was old enough then to handle it. I could, I've been known to fight a teacher. I've been known to hit a student. I had no problem showing you my venom if you show me yours. But what I realized what I recognized as a young adult was, you have to take responsibility for your well-being. Your parents may mean well, but they got flaws too. And they may not know how to protect you to your fullest. So when I reached a point where, by the time I was a late teen, I was not engaging with my parents about my decisions. I decided to go to college. They supported it. Of course, they were, supportive of it, but they weren't involved in it. When I went to college, they weren't involved in it. I got a job. I worked. They supported some of the frivolous stuff I was engaged in, but most of it they wouldn't, they weren't involved with. And what ended up happening was I reached a point in my life where I tried to do everything for myself. And I wasn't, I didn't look upon them for advice, support, or affirmation. So if I was like that in the dunya, when I decided to become Muslim, that was my decision. I never even, and there were, years later, I remember Imam Muhammad was having this lecture. He was talking to people about how important it is if you're converting to discuss it with your family members. Not that you need their approval, but out of respect. Well, I didn't do any of that. When I went to that meeting that night and talked to that brother on the phone and then went to the masjid and then decided I'm Muslim. I was Muslim. I didn't tell him. And one after about 3 weeks of having been Muslim, we all went out. The family went somewhere. I think my brother had a football game or something or another. We all went there. We went to this game or went to an event, and then we all went somewhere, and it was a club. So we went to a nightclub. My daddy was ordering drinks for everybody, and I told him no. And so one of my cousins, and they all knew me as, a good time cat. They knew me as a good timer. So they said, well, you're not drinking. You one of them Muslims now? And that religion wasn't on the table. That wasn't even like a subject matter. So I said, yeah, I am. Oh, my poor mama almost lost it because she was Catholic. My daddy wasn't Catholic. My daddy was Protestant. Oh, that's not possible. So my old man told me, he said, I'll never respect that. So I said, by the way, I changed my name. I changed my last name to Rashid. That really shot him for a loop. But the one thing I knew about my parents were they loved their children regardless. They're the kind would love their children in the penitentiary. For doing something foul, they still would love their children and would do anything to support their children. But that was a real push for them. So and I understood that. And I didn't care. I wasn't living off of them. I hadn't lived off of them for the primary, after college, once I got to college. As a primary means of support, that wasn't there. I accepted their love and all, but what they had to give me, if they gave it to me, alhamdulillah. If they didn't give it, alhamdulillah. It didn't matter. I was at peace with being Muslim. So then when, like I said, I became Muslim within 6 weeks, I was gone. I was Kansas and in D.C. So along the way, they were concerned, what are you doing? My daddy didn't bother with it at all. My mama was, because she was a church-going Catholic. She was first woman to integrate the choir and the this and the that. She even told me years later, I went to the priest and had confession with the priest and asked the priest, about you. I said, well, Ma, I thought confession was you and him. What I got to do with your confession? So she said, the priest told me, is he a better man today than he was before? She said, yeah. Does he respect you and love you? She said, yeah. He said, well, leave him alone. She said, that's when she left me alone, when the priest told her that she could leave me alone. But, that was just an issue they didn't deal with. Now, it was fine as long as I was single because there was nobody else to be dragged into this. They weren't concerned about children being dragged into it or any of that. And so then when we got ready to get married, they hadn't met Wanda until the marriage, because we met at one point, my first Ramadan in D.C., the first night of power in D.C., I wasn't comfortable with Muslim marriages. I didn't understand how that worked, because I'd never been around them. So I saw people who were my age who were married, and I'm still trying to figure out how is this going on? Y'all 20-some years old and you're married and you got children and stuff. I just wasn't, it wasn't processing. That first Ramadan, the first night of power, I saw couples who were my age who were happy. And I was like, this is something good. This is something I am going to do. And I decided that night, I said, I'm getting married. I'm going to get married. I don't know exactly when, but this is going to happen. The next year Ramadan came around, and I made a dua that Allah bring me a wife, somebody that I could share my life with. That same Ramadan was when we met. And then a few months later, we get married. Well, my parents hadn't had an opportunity to meet her. So we decided to get married. I called my old man. I told him, I said, Dad, because that's who I usually would talk to when I call home. Because my mama, we would social, but I could just kick it with my old man because we talk sports and whatever else. So I called him and said, Dad, I'm getting married. Put your mom on the phone. Put my mom on the phone. He puts her on the phone. I'm getting married. Well, who? I told them who it was. I think, did I put you on the phone with them that night? Or
Yes,
I think I
yes,
put her
yes,
on the phone. And she wanted to introduce herself to us, so she wanted to write a letter and explain who she was and all that. I said, you ain't got to do that. My people love me. They will love you. And if they don't, so be it. But I'm not marrying, you're not marrying them. Now, I understand as soon as the family becomes a part of your life, but frankly, I'm marrying her. And you're marrying me, you're marrying them. And I told her, I said, there's going to be some drama about certain things, like children. What are you going to do about the children? You're going to raise them Muslim? Well, yeah, yeah, we're going to raise them Muslim. And at first they said, oh, yeah. They didn't believe it. They couldn't see how that could happen. But the beauty in it is we have 3 children together, and then my wife had a son when we got married. And they're all now, 19, 23, 27, and then 41, right? Yeah, something like that. But when we got married, as the children were growing, especially our daughter, the first child we had, as they began to grow, and school, because we were insisted on, our prayer was that our children, and today our prayer is that the prayer of Abraham, that may Allah bless them, to establish we established the prayer, and our children established the prayer, and it be there forever. And that, till the end to the day of judgment, that our children, our children's children, our ancestry is on this deen. So we were committed to Islamic schools to the best of our ability to do that. And we had moved to New Orleans to practice law. And sort of like what the previous interviewee was saying, how every time I turned the corner, I was running into dead ends. And it would always be me being Muslim. Now, I'm sure there's some people who tell you, no, it's because I didn't have an A in this class and that and this, that, and another. But for the most part, it was always a dead end because I was limited on my opportunities. And the primary skill set that I had, which was labor and employment law, business organizations, I was really running into a dead end opportunities down there. So we, after about 4 years down there, 3.5 or so years down there, we decided we're going to move back to Atlanta. And the school opportunities, Muslim school opportunities, were better here than there. And we did. But as our children started entering school, growing, matriculating through the life as Muslims, my parents began to see that this is working for y'all. And they, toward the end of their lives, because my mother had Alzheimer's and hadn't stopped speaking in the last 5 years of her life, and she had been struggling with it really the last maybe 8 years of her life. And my daddy was relatively healthy, so he was able to express a lot of stuff that she couldn't in the last few years of their lives together, because she died 6 months after he did. And but one thing the conversation would turn to that, and they would say, well, this works for y'all, didn't it? I said, yeah, this works for you. Your children, this is their life. I said, yeah, exactly. And so it, because of the kind of people my parents were, the limited confrontation we had was early on, and that was largely because of the kind of person I was, because this is what I'm doing. It's none of your business. It ain't got nothing to do with you. I love you regardless. You could hate what I do. You could hate who I am. You could hate the things that you hated, some of the stuff I did before Islam. You hated the stuff I did in the street. So I'm doing something I think is good for me, and I'm good with it. Don't matter what you feel about it. Really didn't. It didn't at all. And so it never presented a big issue for me. It might have been more of a big issue for her with my parents than it was with me, because I told her when we first decided to get married, and she wanted to introduce herself to my family. I said, look, don't worry about it. They're going to love you for who you are, period. If you go into explaining and introducing, you're going to open the door for conversations you don't want to have with them. But no, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, I remember years before my daddy died, he had a little spot he would go to with his boys. They'd go hang out once a week. And somebody came in and said something about a Muslim, something totally off the wall about a Muslim. He ready to fight. He said, my children, my son, my grandchildren, they're all Muslim. And I will fight you over disrespecting Muslims. So, they went full circle with it. We even had conversation toward the end of their lives about the dean, about spirit. Because even though I was raised Catholic, by the time I was 16, 17, spirituality wasn't part of my life. I wasn't a churchgoer. I always thought religion was for weak men and oppressive women. Women who want to beat you down and weak men. And I still think to a large extent that's what you see in the African American families that are very spiritual. But I wasn't engaged in religious observance or practice. And Islam was the first as a young adult where I chose to be engaged in religious observance or practice. And so when my family saw me engaged in it, they were struggling with, well, this is kind of good for him, but why you just can't do it the way we do it? And then they eventually accepted it. And they accepted it largely as our children grew. Yes. Because they saw all our children participated in sports and academics in school. They all were lettermen. And, my daughter was a volleyball captain, and she covered. And my sons ran track and cross country, and they lettered in the sport. And they saw them do the things that everybody else did. But they also were, all three of them were presidents of the Muslim American Cultural Club that they had at North Atlanta High School. They saw them be active in their deen, but they also saw them do the things that they thought everybody else should do, with some limits.
So, sister, what was your experience?
Mine was totally different from Kenneth's. I graduated from Howard in 74. I went home to live. My mother died in 75. When I had been married and divorced, and Kenneth said something. He made a dua that he wanted to find someone to get married. I remember sitting in my apartment, and I just asked, and I didn't say Allah, I just asked God I want peace in my life. I want security and peace. And I met Kenneth. So I didn't know if security and peace came in the form of a person, but now I know security and peace came in the form of a person. When I told my family that I was getting married, you've already been married. Why do you want to get married? I didn't say he was Muslim initially. Then I told them, what? That did not go over well. It did not go over well at all. My sisters and my brother and in-laws, they were late to our wedding. Kenneth said, do you want to wait for them? I said, no. So we went and had to have a ceremony. They came in later. My father did not attend our wedding. He came later. And then when he saw that, Kenneth was a regular human being, it was kind of okay. But we did not speak. I did not speak with my family for about 4 years.
Longer than that.
About 4 or 5 years, because, and I think that the problem with a lot of I'm not just going to say African Americans. I think a lot of problems that people have in this country, I think it's a little bit different now, was they didn't know and didn't want to find out, and anything that was not what they perceived to be had to be wrong. Because I remember one of the conversations I had with my sister. You're talking about those people who used to bring those newspapers around and. No, I'm not talking about them, And so we did not have conversations. We did not have conversations for years. Not even speaking. Because I felt that yes, I made mistakes in the past. We all do. But if I found someone who I thought and I prayed for that could bring me peace and security in my life, then why would you object to me with this person? So that means you're going to become Muslim? And I really thought, no, it does not. Kenneth told me as long as I was a God-fearing person and did not impose any shirk in the house, I didn't know what that was either, then we were okay. But, as time evolves, like I said, as I began to read and listen, then I realized that's the way I wanted my life to go. But no, our family experiences were very different, very, very different. As a matter of fact, when my father died in 91, I did not get a chance to talk to him and explain to him who I was and,
did your family interact with your children at all?
Oh, we're fine now.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of what was the turning point.
You went,
I went to my father's funeral, I
Yeah.
think. This was in 91 because Kenneth and I got married in 84. I went to my father's funeral. And I'm talking to my sisters, and I told her, I said, I did not get a chance to talk to him. And then my aunt said, you know what, he was okay. For some reason, he had found peace with whatever happened to you, whatever happened to you. He found there was a peace in it, some peace that came for him. And so after the funeral, then we started communicating. We did family things, but they're in Connecticut and New York, and I'm here, so you can't get together but so often since we have kids because it's kind of expensive, But we did get together. They do interact with our children. Our children do interact, but they don't interact as much as because of the distance. I think more so than anything is because of the distance. But when we do get a chance to, they do. I was going to say about my parents, my father really, because my mother was dead, not accepting me as Muslim. My father's grandfather, like I said, there was an issue about his ethnicity. We do.
your father's father.
My father's father, my grandfather. We believe he was white from Tennessee. Now he was disowned because he married this black female from Sumter County, South Carolina, who was 15. I found that out. And so that's why we don't know anything about his background, because he said, they are dead to me. They did not want to accept me, so they are dead to me. And even with all the conversations with my father and his sister and trying to get information, he refused to talk because he said they're dead to me. So this idea of marrying with your family not accepting who you married, I heard the story, but then I could I related to it because I said, I had a grandfather who was disowned by his family because of who he loved and who he wanted to marry. But we do have a better relationship now. Like I said, I wish I had a chance to talk to my father before he died. The only other thing is my mother. I know as Muslims, we are supposed to pray for our parents. And I make a point of doing that because my mother did not get a chance to know me as Muslim. So I make my dua for her, to make her rest one of ease, to accept all the good that she did. So I look at it that way. But like I said, my family and I, we have a better relationship now. It's okay that you're Muslim. I don't have fangs. I don't have a tail. I'm not, telling you we're going to burn your houses down because, but you know what we've, heard. And I think after 9/11, that really changed because then my sisters and I, we would talk. She said, well, what would cause people to do it? I said, in any religion, you have people who are at the extremes. They don't take the moderation. They don't really know who Allah is, and they don't know the Sunnah. They don't know anything that they're supposed to know about their religion. So they're going to take a little snippet they want that will feed whatever that is they want to feed, and they'll just take it and just blow it up. I said, Timothy McVeigh, I said, he was what? He was Christian, and he espoused that he was doing basically God's work. And so I said, so you can look at situations where people have taken religion, not a way of life, and used it for their own purposes, not for good, but always for evil. And you can blame, and you can say that's what they do. I said, but it's usually one person or a group of people. It's not a whole people of Christendom. It's not all the Muslims in the world. It's just a group of people who've decided that they're going to interpret what they want to interpret. So you cannot stop them. But I said, do I exhibit that? Do I say anything like that? No. And I was working at North Atlanta when 9/11 hit, and Kenneth was telling about our students, our children who are head of the president of the Muslim American Culture Club. That club was brought about as a result of 9/11. We had a teacher who was there who was Muslim. She said, you Muslim students, because we had a very large student body of Muslims there. We had about easy 100 students, easy. She said, we all need to get together with these other students and let them know who we are. And that's what it was, Muslim American Culture Club. We didn't name it MAC. We didn't do anything that we
MSA.
perceived, it was MAC. We didn't do anything we perceived would be us against them. Everybody was invited, and we did. They had a lot of non-Muslims who come there. We made Salat at school. We had Juma on Fridays. So they got to see, even though they went to school with Muslims, but after 9/11 it was a little tainted. But then they got to see students the way they're just students. We're Muslim, but we're students. And as the years progressed, when my daughter graduated, my middle son, same thing. We had the Juma, we had activities, we had all kinds of fundraisers. We would bring lecturers in to talk to them during Ramadan. Everything that we thought that would help them understand what we were doing, we did. Now, my last son, Muhammad, he graduated in 2012. One of his classes, when we would have Juma on Friday, the teacher would actually bring the class down while we were having Juma, and we would pray. Now, there were a lot of students who did not want to participate because I don't know what you all are doing. That's fine. That's fine. But the ones who want, and then they would come in, we'd have the brother, he would talk, they would pray, and then the students who were non-Muslim who would leave, they were like, that's really easy. Yeah, it is. And I think that, we want in this country, or not we, but the country and the media want to put this, this thing up about Muslims. And then when the students actually see what you do during the Jummah and the prayer, it kind of makes sense to them. So all we're hoping is that the presence that our students, our children had in North Atlanta was a positive one, that inshallah, some of the students may take Shahada. We don't know. Because I know we had a couple of kids, they were really awed. They really want to know more. And I know our daughter spoke with a lot of them, and even Jamal, they spoke with a lot of them. But they knew, our youngest Muhammad, they knew Muhammad was Muslim because he had no problems telling you. Who are you, Muhammad Rashid? I'm Muslim. That's the first thing out of his mouth. And he would make you know that he's Muslim. He had no qualms about it. I said, let's not be quite as aggressive about it, but let him know. And I hope, and Allah knows that what we did in North Atlanta through the Muslim American Culture Club at least opened some of the eyes to what was going on in Islam. And you don't, like I said, we never know. But and that's why our dua is that our students, our children, don't lose their Islam. And then when we were not able to have Jummah at some of the public schools, we would always pick them up and take them back. I remember Muhammad, we didn't have Jummah at North Atlanta for some reason, and so it was almost time for him to leave with me. One of his mates said, Muhammad, you're supposed to be going, it's time for Jummah. They kept a record of what was going on Fridays. They told him that if he forgot, they reminded him, you're supposed to go to Jummah right now. So I think it was good that they knew that I'm Muhammad Rashid and I'm Muslim, and they also was good to know that during the time that he was supposed to be doing his Muslim thing, as they would say, that he did it. They kept him on track, which was a good thing, I think,
I hadn't even anticipated this question, but the fact that your children you gave them the tools to be confident in their Muslim identity in the public school setting, for me, is really, it's really good to know that, because I was homeschooled because my mom had concerns about being in public, about having me and my sister in the public school system. So knowing that your children had that confidence to be themselves, to even push for Jummah prayer. There was something you said, Sister Wanda, though, about not all the students being on board in the club, in the cultural club. Were there any tensions between African American and immigrant Muslim students in terms of the club and how to run it?
Well, we did have, when my daughter Mina, she was at North Atlanta from 2000 to 2004. There were so many African American males there, so we didn't have that issue. I mean, there were a lot of students who were non-African American who were Muslim. We didn't have that issue then. When Jamal, our son who graduated in 2008, he was there from 2004 to 2000. He ran into some problems. The African American male population was not quite as high. We had a lot more students who were not African American males who were there. And we tried, one of them tried to have a coup. That did not go well. It did not go well. Jamal told me, but I backed out of it because I'm of the impression, this is a school run. I'm going to be the advisor, which is fine, but you all need to handle this. So Jamal made a point of letting him know that no, we're not changing the name. He said, and he gave him the mission statement. This club was based on the premise that everybody can participate. When you go and have a Muslim, what's it?
What happened was,
he wanted to change the name.
he wanted to make an MSA.
And we said, if you make it MSA, then the students who would participate will not, because they think this is just for Muslims. Where if you have a club and an American club, then you have more students. So when the coup tried to take place, it was going to be a vote. I guess Jamal got everybody who was part of the Muslim American Culture Club. They all came to the meeting. I'm sitting in the back. And so the brother got up and he was ranting on what he wanted to do because we need to change the name. So because of the democratic process, we had a vote. He was voted down. And he was voted down mostly by the Muslim sisters because they came and told him, you're not taking over this and making this what you want. This is who we are. This is our mission statement, and this is what we're going to do. And he did not stop coming. We still came to Juma. We still had all the activities. But I think he realized that he was not going to make this what he wanted to. That we've already been established. And so this is what we're going to do. The other thing was to be about the education. We put our children in Muslim schools in the primary years. And that's what we want in the primary years. Now, my daughter, Mina, she went to Muslim schools all the way to 8th grade, and then she went to high school. Our boys, we put them in middle school. We wanted them to get a foundation so they can be comfortable being Muslims. So by the time they finish, 6th grade or 5th grade, they were comfortable with who they are, who they were and are, so that when they did go into the public school arena, Jamal did not like it. Our middle child, he did not like it.
He didn't like the shift to the public.
Right.
He did not.
Yeah,
he did not like the shift.
Muhammad liked it a little too much.
A little bit too much. Muhammad is our social, our social.
He enjoyed it a little
So
too much.
So we had to kind of pull the reins. And you're Muslim, but let's pull the reins and a little bit on him. He liked it a little bit too much. Jamal did not like it at all. And Mina, I guess Mina,
Well, see,
she liked it.
our goal when we started this was they were Muslim, like your mother, except we didn't do the homeschool, Muslim schools all the way through. And since we were here in Atlanta Masjid had the Muhammad high schools, we knew that was an option. But one of the things we struggled with as African Americans was that there seemed to be, because our children Mina started at Clara Muhammad schools, and then she went to West End. West End had a school at one time. She went to West End for a year. And then eventually she wound up at Darul Noor. And what we found with her was there was a little too much emphasis, in our opinion, on their racial ethnic status as Muslims. That hyphenated status, Muslim American, African American, Muslim, all of that. Instead of teaching Sunnah, Deen, language, which was more important to us. Because our thing was we've lived being African American. Yeah, we can learn the historical significance of events and lives, and you can read books, but you've lived it. There's not much more you have to do other than live it, But what we found was, for us, there was too much of an emphasis on their ethnicity and race in the evolution of children growing up as Muslims. So one good thing we had as an experience with educating the children was when we took them and put them in Darul Noor. Now, all schools have flaws, and I'm not here to tell you all those schools were perfect, and if you had any experience with them, they got flaws. But as children, what our children were able to do was grow up learning about the diversity in Islam from their peers. So they have had healthy relationships with all sorts of Muslims from backgrounds. They've had unhealthy relationships with all sorts of Muslims from different backgrounds. They've had the children. I remember my daughter had some friends who were, parents were born in Pakistan, the children were born here, and they'd want to come and spend the night. Fine. No, the parents would let them come if we would pick them up at a neutral, safe location. But we had to bring our children, in their mind, their location was always safe, no matter where it was. So we were supposed to be able to bring our children to their house, but they couldn't come to our house. They couldn't bring them to our house. We would have to meet them neutral. And, I put into that one right quick. But no, that's not going to happen. You want to bring your child in my house, you come to my house. If it's safe enough for me and my crew to live in it, it's safe enough for you to come over here. I'll take care of you. Don't worry about it, because you better take care of me when I go out to Roswell or some other hellhole, in North Georgia. But they've had experiences that have been good and bad across the board. Yeah. And I credit the Dora Noor experience with that because of the diversity. Not so much the institution itself, but because of the children. So as young adults now, they have friends across this Islamic spectrum. And they're not narrowly focused on African American Islamic experience, whatever that is. They're not limited to that. So that has been a great blessing for them. And the only reason our children all went to North Atlanta as a high school was because that's the only school in APS that offered Arabic as a language. So all of ours took 4 years of language in high school. And prior to 9/11, the children in the Arabic language program in North Atlanta, if they did well in their junior, senior year, they could go spend the summer in, at one time, Egypt, and another time they would go to Morocco. Mm-hmm. And that healthy learning experience was real great. It was much better than it was the last years that Muhammad was over there. But that was the only reason they went there. And the large numbers of Muslims who were going to North Atlanta was because of the Arabic. Now, APS changed its admissions lines, enrollment lines, and changed from a magnet-centered program where you could identify international studies as a program, go to North Atlanta. They wiped all that out and went to neighborhood schools, which then forced children to go to schools that might not be able to serve that unique need. But ours were blessed enough to be able to get it. But I tell young people who have young families that have children, if you can, home or Islamic schools in the primary years, because those children don't have enough wherewithal to fight all the sociological, cultural forces that non-Muslims are putting on them, whether they intend to do it to dissuade them from their faith or just out of ignorance. They do reach a point much younger than we anticipate where they can protect their emotional well-being. And that puberty, they usually can protect their emotional well-being. And we asked our older two children, when they were in college, or I think one had just finished, the other one was in college, we asked them what they thought about their experience as in school, the experience we provided for them in their education. And, they did say that they thought, comparing their friends who were nurtured in the womb, who stayed in the home school all the way through, or Islamic schools all the way through, that they were no more disadvantaged because they knew a clean glass of water and a dirty glass of water. They could see it. It was clear. There was no fallacy of, because we're in the Muslim school, it's perfect. They saw clean and dirty water. They saw Muslims who were just as corrupt and foul. I mean, when we had the large number of Muslim children at North Atlanta, I remember one year they called myself and Brother Ibrahim, who's now dead, and Imam Nadim, and to meet with the administration, because they wanted to know how to discipline the Muslims. You discipline them the same way you discipline everybody else. If they doing things they're not supposed to do, you discipline them. But they were having issues with Muslim students that you'd have with young people, and lost in what should we do? You do to them what you do everybody else. But they seem to have had a healthy experience. Now we've accepted that we probably took our youngest out of Muslim schools a couple years too early, and we probably should have let them the boys stay in through eighth grade, because they would have been a little more mature when they went to public schools. But we had problems at Muslim schools with the way young African American boys were being treated at Dora Noor. And I really think that had a lot to do with cultural ignorance, the perception that everything they did was aggressive.
Yeah.
You know, they're playing basketball. You're being too aggressive, but they're playing basketball. Everything it was always a sense of they were being too aggressive, too assertive, and so we just said it's not worth the fight anymore. We'll take them out. They know a clean glass and a dirty glass. Hopefully they grab the clean glass, and they have so far. It's for the most part, but it's I tell them now, y'all better decide what you're going to do about educating children when none of our children yet are married, and we pray that they will be soon. But what you going to do? You got to make a decision. You got to make a decision. You can't just leave it up to, well, we have some institutions that exist. That's true, and they all are doing admirable jobs to the best of their ability. But they need to focus on what are you planning to do for this next generation. We've done some work, but there's a lot more work to be done. Not just personally, but as communities. I'm assuming you all have young children, or will have them soon. Y'all got a lot of work left to be done that we haven't done yet. Are you educating them and social culturalizing them? The culturalizing them to how to interact with one another beyond just rules. Because as people, we're good at giving rules. The rule is this is the way you conduct yourself. The sooner is it. That's true. But how do you implement that in your world? And that's a conscious effort that you young people are stuck with, because we haven't done it. We really haven't done it.
That is, I'm sorry.
And I want to thank you for taking the interview from the past from the past to the present into the future.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I really do like the direction our conversation has taken. Now we do have to wrap up, so Brother Bilal, do you have maybe a concluding question?
No, I think y'all hit. I was sitting thinking, I was like, is there anything that we didn't ask? And I don't think, because you went there. You pretty much went to.
I did want to make one
Maybe you
statement
can
that,
have the last word, Sister Wanda.
if you don't mind, I did want to make one statement that all the Muslim communities that we have been a part of, we're all human beings, and I think we should look at that seriously, because a lot of people do not. Because if you don't dot your I the way I do across your T, then there's something wrong with you. But I try to remind myself, and I try to remind our children, we're all human beings. Nobody would be here without a mercy from Allah. So what we have to do is to make sure that we are the best person that we can be, that we always put forward the best that we can be, and so that when things don't look the way they should look, then you could have a hand in making it correct. Not blaming, not pointing the finger, not telling them that they're wrong, but that you have studied this religion, you have up to this point, and if you don't, then you need to study it more, so that when you see something that may not be correct, then you correct it the right way, not condescending, not pointing the finger, but say, go to the books, go to the Hadith, go to the Quran, find out what was done, and then put that forward. So all I'm going to say is, it was a mercy from Allah that I met Kenneth. You think about the relationship you had before and after, and I think that my relationship with Kenneth is what I prayed for. I did not know that at the time. But over these years, I've come to realize that when you ask Allah for something and you ask for it sincerely, He will grant it to you. And we have to keep that in mind, that all you have to do is ask.
And on that note, thank you so much. We're very honored to sit down with you, Sister Wanda, Brother
That's all right.
And Jazakallah
Alhamdulillah.
for sharing your story.
Thank you.